It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News live from the Cenotaph in central London as the nation prepares to fall silent to remember its war dead. Hello, a very good morning. King Charles will lead the Remembrance Day commemorations for the first time as monarch. We'll be live across the UK as a 2-minute silence is observed at 11 o'clock, with wreaths laid here at the Cenotaph by members of the royal family, senior politicians and faith leaders. It'll be a poignant moment for the royal family. Remembrance Sunday was considered by Queen Elizabeth II as one of the most significant and important engagements in the royal calendar. Our royal correspondent, Rhiannon Mills, reports.
50 years ago, he placed his first wreath. Through the decades, always one step behind his mother. This year, he'll step up as monarch and head of the armed forces. Alistair Graham supported him as his equerry between 2002 and 2004. With Britain caught up in the Gulf War, the now King's dedication to the military was clear.
We were tasked to rearrange the programme to make sure that His Majesty could give as much time as possible to the regiment's families that were left behind while they were serving, the next rule of regiments going out to replace those that had been part of the initial invasion, and maintaining very close links through the chiefs of staff to understand what was going on and how the war was progressing. And I think it's an intrinsic part of his role as king, and he understands that there is an indelible link to our armed forces.
Those who know him well say his understanding developed early, learning to fly with the RAF, training with the Parachute Regiment and serving as a captain in the Navy, making him, some would say, the most military-trained king we've ever had. Since 2017, another duty has been placed on him, laying the Queen's wreath as she watched on. It was deeply symbolic that the Queen, during her lifetime, was able to hand over that important responsibility to her son. And while, yes, this weekend will be the first time that he places that wreath as monarch, the familiarity of that sight means it won't entirely be a distraction from those they're here to remember. Nearly 10,000 people will join the Royal British Legion march past. 400 veterans from the Falklands War forming the largest contingent 40 years since the war. Among them, Andrew Lawless, who says the King's presence will be welcomed.
He said himself he wants to follow in his mother's footsteps, so his sense of duty, his sense of service is definitely there, and we know that. There's a solemn part to it as well, you know, and certainly when I'm marching past the Cenotaph, will be, you know, the names will be going through my head of friends and colleagues that are not here.
This weekend, the Queen has still been a focus at events like the Festival of Remembrance. Her son, the King, now leading the family and the nation as we all pay tribute to others who've served. Rhiannon Mills, Sky News in central London.
Well, our royal correspondent Laura Bundock is here with me. And Remembrance Sunday is such an important day for the nation to come together and remember those who've lost their lives in conflict. But today, of course, has this added poignancy, doesn't it, for the royal family, given that King Charles will be here laying a wreath for the first time as monarch just months after his mother died.
Yeah, it feels very significant, doesn't it? Because this is today another milestone along that transition to a new monarch, and another one of those moments, another one of those days where I think we will all be remembering just how things have changed, how things are different now. Of course, the King knows the routine here. He was laying the wreath on behalf of his mother since 2017, but it is his first time doing it as monarch, and I'm sure he'll be well aware of that. The poignancy of that moment will not be lost on him. He does, though, totally understand the connection and the deep connection between the armed forces, the significance of today, and the link with the royal family as well, not just because his father served in the Navy, his grandfather as well, but I think he himself has been very keen to learn about what it is to be a service personnel, what it is to go on operations. He's always had an interest in that, in the training side of things, in the technology side of things, and the impact it has on families as well. And of course, he's met veterans throughout the years. But I feel today perhaps is also marking a bit of an end of that World War II generation in a way, with the passing of the Queen. Although, having said that, I've just met someone who's 100 years old who served in World War II. So he will be here today, very much part of the march. But I think the King appreciates how the armed forces work. He gets it. He's served in uniform he himself. He knows what it takes for the families, for the men and women themselves as well. And he understands the deep importance of today to his mother and to the nation as he now lays that wreath on behalf of the nation.
So real significance for the Queen, as we know. I think she only missed 7 of these events at the Cenotaph over her very long reign, which is quite extraordinary in itself, isn't it?
Yeah.
But today he will lay his own wreath, and it's going to be different. It's a new wreath now that he's monarch, isn't it?
Yes, it is. So his wreath will be based on the wreath of his mother and his grandfather. So you'll see the black leaves forming the base of it. There'll be fewer poppies, we're told, larger poppies. But in a nod to the Queen, he will have the ribbon in the colour of the royal racing colours, so scarlet, purple and gold, which is a tradition the Queen was obviously keen to incorporate into her wreath. A wreath too today for Camilla as Queen Consort. And of course we'll see Prince William, now Prince of Wales, laying the wreath that his father would have laid. He'll be laying that on behalf of himself and the Princess of Wales too. So you'll get a real sense, I think, of the transition of power. I mean, just look at the lineup of prime ministers we'll see as well. But it's apparent everywhere, and I think today more than any day when we see the King, it'll be very interesting, I think. I think we'll see emotion on his face, especially in that 2-minute silence perhaps, as he takes on this duty. I mean, the Queen, in some ways, it was a significant and symbolic gesture when she asked him to lay the wreath on her behalf back 5 years ago. And I think some saw that as this transition, handing over some of the roles and responsibilities to get people used to this idea. So it's not like we haven't seen him doing this. There is just this added symbolism, this added importance today, because he is now king.
And we should reflect on the atmosphere here, Laura, because people have been able to gather, members of the public, since about 8 o'clock when they opened up the street. A lot of security around ahead of that, of course. And there's a sort of sombre atmosphere, but there's also a sense of old friends coming together as well, isn't there? We're going to see this march past of 10,000 veterans, a hugely poignant moment for them, but one where they come together in a sense of camaraderie and a show of appreciation from members of the public.
Very much so, and I think for any of the men and women here who've served together, there is this shared sense of what it is like, what the job entails, and it is a difficult job. And as many of the men and women here will tell you, if they've been on active service, they won't have come home with all the colleagues they left with. And I think that shared experience is what makes moments like this particularly important. I met someone who'd served in the Falklands. He's never been to this march. This is his first time on the 40th anniversary of the Falklands. He said it felt like, normally for me it's a private moment, but actually 40 years on, I think it is important to get together, to remember what we went through, the people who didn't come home with us, and to be part of this. And 10,000 people is a lot of people, and the atmosphere is that strange balance between very respectful, very reverent, and one of great remembrance, but also a coming together and an importance of that as well.
That's right, and I spoke to somebody who'd served in Afghanistan and after just 6 weeks broke his back, so had the most extraordinary experience and is now gathering, raising money for the Poppy Appeal and really wanting to stay involved with his comrades. But a really moving day for people like him who've suffered themselves but also seen others suffer so much.
And I think that's why the Royal British Legion is so keen on keeping this march going. And not just for the older generations, but I met a girl who's part of the Scottish soldiers. So these are children who've lost parents in action. She was 12 weeks old when her dad died in Afghanistan. She never met him, she never knew him. But through this charity and being able to take part in days like today, so it means an awful lot to her. She's with other children who've gone through the same thing. It's a very unique grieving, she said, we have. And it's important. They'll be there wearing their black and yellow stripy scarves, and I'll be looking out for them because these are the children, and we often perhaps forget the families who are left behind, as well as seeing all the servicemen and women themselves here. But she'll be taking part in this. So a real range of the ages, from the centurion who I met to a 16-year-old as well.
That's right. So really important, the work that the Royal British Legion does, as you say, supporting veterans but also their families. Laura, for the moment, thanks very much indeed. We'll catch up with you in just a moment. But first, let's take a look at the order of events, shall we, through the course of the day. Coming up in around 50 minutes' time at 11 o'clock, the country will pause for a 2-minute silence to remember its war dead. Now, after 5 years of conservation work, Big Ben will officially return to mark the start of the silence by striking 11 times. Wreaths will then be laid at the Cenotaph in London by senior politicians, faith representatives, as well as members of the royal family. King Charles, for the first time as monarch, will lay a new poppy wreath incorporating a ribbon of his racing colours. And the design is a tribute to his late mother and his grandfather as well, George VI. A wreath will also be laid on the Queen Consort's behalf for the first time, as Camilla herself watches from the balcony of the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office building. Around 10,000 Royal British Legion veterans will take part in a march past. They'll be joined by an estimated 10,000 members of the public who'll line Whitehall to watch the service. So I'm joined now by Paul Jenkins, who served in the Royal Navy from 1963 to 1975, and he served on the Royal Yacht Britannia for more than 5 years. Thanks so much for talking to us, Paul Jenkins, this morning. We really appreciate it. Tell us, first of all, about your time on the Royal Yacht Britannia. What was that experience like for you?
It was a very great experience. It was a very big surprise. I was asked to go on board. I stayed on board for 5 years.
And did you come across members of the royal family in your time there?
Oh yes, when we were on royal duty, when the Queen finished all her speeches and things, she came on board and they would dress down and they'd walk around and speak to all the crew. On the Sunday morning, a member of the crews will go to the church service in the royal apartments.
And what was that like, to see her come on board like that? What did it mean to the crew?
It was a great, great privilege and make us proud. We were proud of the Queen, God bless her, and also the Duke.
And having memories like that personally yourself, does today have an added sadness for you, as it's the first Remembrance Sunday service since her death?
Very much so, because we've known her for many, many years. The yacht was in commission for 50 years, and a lot of the Britannia boys have known the King, as he is now, and the Queen for many, many years. In fact, we've all grown up with him, and I believe the King's birthday is on Monday, and he's 3 years younger than me, so we all know him very, very well.
And meanwhile, the Royal British Legion plays such an important role today, doesn't it? Organising the veterans march past later. I know you've got a long history of fundraising for them, getting involved in their poppy appeal. Why is it so important to you?
Well, it's got to be remembered. What's now to me is a very great privilege. See these young cadets now doing it. Children at school are told now about the Second World War, told about the First World War. They now begin to revive about all those people that's died in all these conflicts. And I hope the children of today will not get any medals like us, because that means they'll have to go to a war, and I hope they will never have to go to another war.
Yeah, and so what does it mean to you when you see members of the public, all generations, wearing the poppy?
It fills you with pride. It's just to show now that people still remember, all age groups. Like I said, they're now being taught about it in school as well, which is a great, great comfort, a great privilege to the children to learn all about their ancestors, and hopefully they'll never see a war zone ever again.
And so today at 11 o'clock, when the 2-minute silence is observed, have you thought what you might be reflecting on in that moment?
Well, yes, I will think about people past and present. I mean, I did lose a few friends in the Far East when we were out in the 60s, and I still know the families, and we remember them all. We remember all the servicemen that died, and civilians, because even the civilians have passed away as well through conflict.
Well, Paul Jenkins, we really appreciate you taking a moment to talk to us here on Sky News. Thanks very much indeed for your time.
Thank you.
Well, our events commentator, Alistair Bruce, will be keeping a very close eye on events and talking us through them throughout the morning. Alistair, a hugely important day for members of the armed forces, for veterans, but also for members of the public who want to reflect on those who've made the ultimate sacrifice serving their country.
Very much so, and while we concentrate on what's happening in London, we must remember that in Edinburgh, Cardiff and Belfast and every village and every town and every city of the United Kingdom and then across the Commonwealth, people at their own 11 o'clock will be gathering to mark this. And it's an extraordinary ceremonial because it's one of the few that has such huge buy-up. People are very happy to play their part in remembering the cost of freedom. And for those who are wearing their medals or have their own memories, and for the families who supported them through the time they served, it is a very poignant moment. And it's often difficult to convey this to younger generations, except that our news programmes are full of quite harrowing experiences shown to us of war that are taking place in Europe again. And I think that for that reason, this moment of silence, the 2 minutes that people will share in different places around the United Kingdom and focused on the King here at the Cenotaph at 11 o'clock, is a very special and worthy time of reflection.
As you say, people taking a moment in their own way up and down the country, other services taking place in towns and cities across the map. But give us an idea of what we can expect from this Remembrance Day service here at the Cenotaph.
Well, we're seeing the bands bring various parts of the serving armed forces together in order to create the framing of this national act of remembrance. And after they're all in place, the armed forces, as it were, holding the ground, with the veterans, almost 10,000 of them, waiting up towards Trafalgar Square to take their own march past. We then see representatives of the many Commonwealth countries and of the dependencies and of the government and of the opposition parties come and take their place. And finally, just before 11 o'clock, the King will lead members of the royal family out and they will stand in silence while the gun is fired on Horse Guards Parade to start the 2-minute silence. And in that 2-minute silence, people are invited to bring their own thoughts and place them in the cenotaph, which means empty tomb, which was built to stand 102 years ago in order to provide exactly that, a place for people to put their thoughts and their reflections.
And how difficult today, how poignant today do you think this will be for King Charles? The first time that he will lay a wreath as monarch and the first time since, of course, his mother, the Queen, passed away.
The King, like his mother, the Queen, is a servant, and as a servant sovereign, is there to represent the nation. And when he lays the wreath, whatever private thoughts he has, he carries on the act that his great-grandfather, King George V, began after the First World War. And it's been carried on by sovereigns ever since. And in that act of service to the nation, he represents all those who wish to be present there at the Cenotaph, or at their own various events around the country and Commonwealth, or watching with us. And so it is that moment, of course, poignant because his mum isn't around. And actually it was this time last year we were told the Queen was not going to be able to attend, which is a reminder that throughout her life, she always saw this as one of those events she had to try and attend no matter what. And the King will be the same.
Well, Alistair, I know that we'll be rejoining you shortly and you'll be commentating throughout the morning on the events here at the Cenotaph. But for the moment, thanks very much indeed. And just to let you know that a little bit earlier, our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes, spoke to the chief of the defence staff, Admiral Sir Tony Radakin. They discussed the war in Ukraine, as well as pressures on defence spending. But she began by asking about Remembrance.
I think Remembrance Sunday is always poignant. I think it's poignant for the whole nation, this special moment when we pause to reflect on the sacrifice and commitment of others to provide our freedom today. I think there's a special poignancy this year with both the loss of Her Majesty, another loss of a Second World War veteran. And I also think it's poignant when we have once again the spectre of war in Europe and all that that entails, and a country that's been invaded and is fighting for its freedom.
We're remembering those who gave their lives in the First and the Second World Wars. And like you said, right now, Europe has war once again on its soil. How likely is it that this could actually escalate into the Third World War?
I think what you've seen, we're approaching now nearly 9 months, is that the war is relatively contained in terms of geography. The impact of the war is enormous. That's global. The impact on food prices, the impact on millions of people and whether or not they were going to get the grain that Ukraine provides, the impact on all of us, whether it's inflation or the energy crisis. And I think those are all a reminder that even though the war itself might be relatively physically contained, what it means is millions of people that have been displaced from their country, millions of people that are being attacked and they're losing their energy or their water doesn't work anymore. Millions of people fighting for their freedom. That's what you're seeing. And tens of thousands of people that are dying or are injured. And it's that reminder that these precious values of freedom, of democracy, of that your territory is your own, and that when that's attacked, then the right people defend those and they fight to get them back.
We're talking just after Russia has given this order to withdraw its troops from Kherson city in the south of Ukraine. How significant is that?
I think it's significant in the sense that, once again, you're seeing Russia fail. Russia's failed on all of its strategic objectives. It wanted to subjugate Ukraine. The opposite has happened. Ukraine is fighting for its freedom. It wanted to take control of the cities. You saw that fail. It wanted to weaken NATO. NATO is stronger. And now you're seeing a war that inevitably at the tactical level has twists and turns. But you're seeing a Russia under pressure, taking desperate measures. That's why it's had to mobilize additional people. But it's got to try and overcome a nation that's fighting for its freedom, a nation that we're supporting alongside lots of other international countries, whether that's cash, whether that's armament, whether that's ammunition.
So your US counterpart, General Mark Milley, has said that the withdrawal in Kherson could provide a window of opportunity for negotiations between the two sides. What do you think?
I think that those windows will be determined by President Zelensky and President Putin. And undoubtedly, the tactical events might open those windows a little bit more. But we've got to respect that Ukraine is fighting for its territory, its future, its survival. And this is a success for Ukraine. But at the same time, Ukraine continues to be attacked. Ukraine has lost ground that it needs to win back. Ukraine has got millions of people that are not living in their homes. They're either living elsewhere in Ukraine or in the rest of Europe. They've got millions of people that are suffering from the impacts of the electrical infrastructure having been attacked or the water infrastructure being attacked. It is a war crime to deliberately attack civilians, and that's what's still going on.
And is there any change in your assessment on the likelihood of Russia backed into a corner resorting to a nuclear strike in Ukraine?
I think we've got to be really careful of reckless rhetoric where these noises are made about nuclear, whether it's a dirty bomb or it's a tactical nuclear weapon. we should be really careful about that language. That would be another total horrific step, and we don't see that we're on a pathway to that particular spectre. And we've also got to be really clear that if we started to go down that path, that it would lead to incredibly serious consequences, but where none of us are on that path. And Russia, I think, has tried to reassure in that sense, and I think we've been really clear as to how dangerous that particular route would be.
Sky News reported this week about claims that Russia has transported captured British NLAW anti-tank missiles, US anti-tank Javelins and US Stinger anti-aircraft missiles to Iran, along with loads of cash, £122 million worth in cash, in exchange for dozens of drones, these deadly Shahed drones that that Russia's been using in Ukraine. Were you aware of this?
So I won't go into the detail of intelligence reports, but we've always been aware that when we provide some of our weaponry and it's going into a war zone, there's a risk that that weaponry might be captured. And so what I can offer you is that the technology that we're talking about is technology of 20, 30 years ago, and then that technology is used in the manufacturing process to provide the weapons of today. And so we're conscious that when we provide armament and support to a Ukraine that's in a war, then there might be some of those weapons that end up being captured, and that's taken into account when we go through our assessment as to what's going to be provided.
So are you going to do anything about it if Iran is trying to develop NLAWs?
So we're in a constant competition with certain nations. It's very much the case with Iran, but it's a fact that when you provide your weapons to country X in the middle of a war, they may not necessarily stay in country X.
The Chancellor is going to be giving his autumn statement on Thursday. How confident are you that defence will be protected from the impact of inflation and foreign exchange?
I can't go into the detail of a financial statement that's going to be announced later this week. But what I can offer you is the seriousness with which the situation is being discussed. We have a Prime Minister, he's been Prime Minister for just over 2 weeks. He's had numerous conversations with the Defence Secretary, with me, about the security situation in Europe, but also the globe. But we specifically had an hour with the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, and I accompanied the Defence Secretary to talk about what would be the impact of a financial settlement, and to the richness and the seriousness of that conversation, recognising that this war in Europe is part of the reason why we have the level of inflation that we have and why we have the economic pressure. And therefore, in trying to deal with the economic pressure, we need to acknowledge that at its core is this security pressure in Europe. And the government is having the right level of conversation to try and manage that, but also manage the security situation into the future. So that's why you're seeing a conversation about coming back to the integrated review of last year and taking time to assess that again. What is working, what do we want to affirm, and what might we want to adjust and recognise because of the increased aggression of Russia. We need to adjust some of the risks that we were taking, and that might mean in the longer term more investment. But let's have that longer term conversation as well.
The government keeps saying there needs to be economic stability in order to have things like defence spending. Do you think they're now realising that there cannot be economic stability without security? And in terms of having security, you need therefore to invest fully in defence?
Absolutely, and I think you saw that with last year's integrated review. An integrated review that tried to take into account...
An integrated review that's not going to be funded unless this government gives you £8 billion, according to the Defence Secretary himself, over the next 2 years. Are you going to get this £8 billion?
So I can't go into the specifics,
but what happens if you don't get it?
So again, I think it would be wrong to start talking about, if we don't get it, then it means this, this and this. Those conversations are being had with the Prime Minister and the Chancellor. They're private conversations. I can assure you that those conversations are being had. They're the right conversations, and they're being blended with what was said in last year's integrated review, what needs to be shaped for the longer term future, but also to recognise the immediate economic pressure the country is under, but also recognise there's a war in Europe, and that the seriousness of those conversations are being had, and that's the assurance I can give you.
Well, I'm sure they're serious, but if they don't end up with £8 billion for defence over the next 2 years, then they're meaningless. It means defence has to shrink. Would you resign if that happens? So
we've got to wait and see what the autumn statement says. I think we've got to be really cautious of the risk of being a bit too shrill and saying, right, if this happens, then I'm going to, this person's going to resign, and that. I'm much more in the space of the right conversations are being had. Let's wait and see what the autumn statement says. Let's take stock then. Let's recognise there's a blend going on of economic pressures that have to be serviced and security pressures that have to be serviced, and the right conversations are being had to allow those solutions to emerge.
Chief of the Defence Staff, Admiral Sir Tony Radakin, talking there to our Security and Defence Editor, Deborah Haynes. And so you join us here live at the Cenotaph in London as members of the armed forces, veterans, senior politicians and ambassadors and faith leaders, as well, of course, as thousands of members of the public are gathering to pay tribute to those who've lost their lives in past conflicts. There's a 2-minute silence at 11 o'clock, of course, and as we head up to that, let's just bring in our royal correspondent here with me, Laura Bundock. And it is an extraordinary scene here, isn't it, Laura? And so many members of the public here lining these streets. I don't know, is that 15 deep or so? And a kind of low-level hum of chatter. There's a kind of a really lovely atmosphere. It's kind of respectful, isn't it?
Yes. It's hard, isn't it, to place the atmosphere here, but I think it is a warm respect for the armed forces. Many in the crowd obviously wearing medals themselves, appreciating perhaps, without doubt, the efforts, the work that the military does, and wanting to be here in person to see that. And of course, there is another big moment today. This is, as King, Charles's first opportunity to lay the wreath as monarch, as sovereign. He's done it on behalf of the Queen since 2017, when, as we will remember, she would stand at the balcony and watch down. Many saw that as the first step, really, and that shift towards handing over some of the duties and responsibilities, perhaps so we would be prepared for this very day, this very moment. But an incredibly significant moment for him. I mean, he knows the routine. He obviously knows what to do, where to stand, how it all works, because it is a very, very ordered series of events here. But I think that 2-minute silence, and we saw it often, didn't we, following the death of the Queen, those moments of pause, you could almost see on his face the significance of the moment. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see as monarch Charles looking reflective, remembering obviously not just the service personnel but the Queen too. When we know this was such an important event for her, she missed it so few times, and it was last year when at the very, very last minute she wasn't able to come and she sprained her back. But I think there was genuine concern at that point as well. But bar a couple of pregnancies and overseas tours, she was here every single year. It was 50 years ago since Charles laid his first wreath here. So like I say, he's an old hand when it comes to this. But nonetheless, I think being here, being there at the Cenotaph with that wreath for the nation is an incredibly big moment for him.
Well, that's right, and for the royal family as they reflect, no doubt, not just on the deaths of those who've lost their lives fighting in conflicts, but also of the Queen herself. And remind us who's going to be here from the royal family.
So we will see a succession of wreaths being laid. Obviously the King will lay his first. We'll see William as Prince of Wales now lay a wreath. The wreaths are interesting actually. The King's wreath very much based on the design of his mother's and his grandfather's. It will carry the royal racing colours of scarlet, purple and gold. A slightly different design we're told, so not quite as many poppies but larger poppies, but very much a nod and a tribute to the Queen in his wreath. Queen Consort has a wreath. It'll be laid not by her but by an equerry. That will be laid too. And then the Prince of Wales on behalf of him and his wife, the Princess of Wales, will be laying that. And we're seeing this transition of power, aren't we? So there's William stepping up into the role his father had for so many years here, in the same way his father has. And I think that's played out too when you look at the Prime Ministers who are here too. It won't be every single former Prime Minister laying a wreath, but certainly when you see how many Prime Ministers there are, most of whom, bar of course Rishi Sunak, knew the Queen and would have met the Queen, you see this transition of power. It's a very traditional moment, isn't it? It's interesting how it sort of reflects so much of our lives.
Indeed. Well, Laura, thanks very much indeed. And of course, after the laying of the wreaths, we will have at 11 o'clock the country pausing for a 2-minute silence to remember its war dead. And after 5 years of conservation work, Big Ben will officially return to mark the start of the silence by striking 11 times. And we will see wreaths then laid at the cenotaph by the members of the royal family, as we were saying, senior politicians, those faith representatives as well. So a huge amount on show here in Whitehall. Our events commentator, Alistair Bruce, will take us through every step of the way. Alistair. Well, we'll be joined by Alistair very shortly. He's be joining us in just 1 second. But as our royal correspondent just there, Laura Bondock, was saying, we will see King Charles, for the first time as monarch, laying this new poppy wreath, which incorporates a ribbon of his racing colours. And the design is a tribute to his late mother, as well as his grandfather, George VI. And a wreath will also be laid on the Queen Consort's behalf for the first time, as Camilla watches from the balcony of the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office building, no doubt with other members of the royal family also looking down on proceedings. And then we will get the March of the Veterans. Around 10,000 Royal British Legion veterans will take part in the march past. And in the meantime, an estimated 10,000 members of the public who are lining these streets of Whitehall to watch the service as well, of course. Alongside the new wreaths, they will be accompanied by handwritten cards bearing Their Majesty's new ciphers, the King and the Queen Consorts. The Prince of Wales will lay the wreath previously laid by his father, featuring the Prince of Wales's feathers, and it'll also bear a new ribbon in Welsh red. And as we were just hearing from Laura, the service will also be attended by the Princess of Wales, the Earl and Countess of Wessex, the Princess Royal and Vice Admiral Sir Tim Lawrence. Also the Duke and Duchess of Gloucester, the Duke of Kent, and Princess Alexandra. And while our focus is currently here on the cenotaph in Whitehall, here in London, there will be services going on up and down the country, and silence is held in villages, towns and cities across the United Kingdom as people take a moment to pay tribute to those servicemen and women who have lost their lives. So let's bring in our events commentator, Alistair Bruce.
Wherever you are around the United Kingdom or further afield, we're gathering our thoughts here in Westminster as the music is played, trained with all the usual traditions that have been followed since the beginning of this ceremony so many years ago. Heart of Oak, which was composed by Dr. Boyce, reminds us very much of the Royal Navy's involvement in the protection of this island, followed by The Minstrel Boy and Men of Harlech, which we hear now. And the music will give way to the Sky Boat Song and carry us in our thoughts to Scotland. The pipes and drums, the 4th Battalion, the Highlanders, the Royal Regiment of Scotland. And with the mass bands of the Household Division and musicians from the Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force, this act of remembrance will follow. At the centre, the cenotaph, built in 1920 to be a focus for the countless lives lost during the First World War. Designed with the empty tomb at the top. The intention that every family that passed by could place into that chill tomb the warm memories of the person that they had lost. This year is the 40th anniversary of the Falklands War. 255 people were lost recovering the islands from the attack by Argentina in 1982. For many of that generation, the chance to come here to the cenotaph or reflect upon those lives lost amongst the countless of the First World War who represent a generation long gone, but also the Second World War. There is One of the veterans today, at 101, will be marching past amongst all these memories of more recent veterans who wait for the 2-minute silence that will start at exactly 11 o'clock. The glorious dead inscribed into this Portland stone memorial. It was first erected in 1919, made out of wood, lath and plaster. The King attended the service. It was intended only to be used for one occasion, but the national response to the memorial meant that it was built permanently in stone. And it has represented not just the First World War, but all conflicts since. The loss of those in the armed services, but also in the civil services. The civilian services like the police, the ambulance, fire brigade, who looked after London in the Blitz and who have dealt with bombs and terrorist actions, or who have done what they can in service to keep the nation safe. As the pipers play Flowers of the Forest. Wherever you are, you will have your own thoughts about war. You may have people you are remembering now. You may be so young that war seems a very distant concept. And yet now in Europe, there is war. And for those who have a memory, you will be bearing that through this ceremony. For me, I remember particularly Guardsman Jim Reynolds, who looked after me and was part of my old platoon in 1982. He was 19 when he was killed. He had already taken out a machine gun post on Mount Tumbledown, and then he went to the aid of a wounded comrade, and in the process, he was killed. A selfless act that was among so many, remembered by all of us here today. The music Nimrod was written by Elgar to remember a great friend of his. While it plays, I suggest you think about whoever it is, or whatever thoughts you want to muster for the 2-minute silence later on. the veterans gather with their wreaths and so many stories in their minds as they're welcomed by people who have been waiting here since quite early this morning. The ground being kept by the Royal Navy, the Royal Air Force and the Army with the civilian forces. And with a guard of honour from the King's Scouts, the religious procession begins with the processional cross that was given to the Queen to mark her Platinum Jubilee, made with oak from the Sandringham estate and decorated with a Welsh daffodil, an Irish shamrock, English rose and Scottish thistle. There are 70 silver studs, one for each year of the Queen's reign, marked today with the poppies and carried by Arya Nagpal, who is the cross bearer, followed by Jonathan Simpson, the Sergeant of the Vestry, and also the children and gentlemen of the Chapels Royal. 10 children who all attend the City of London School, and 6 gentlemen in ordinary to lead the services. And among the clergy, the Chaplain General, the Reverend Michael Parker, Lieutenant Colonel, the Reverend Canon Paul Wright, Sub-Dean of the Chapels Royal, and also the Dean of His Majesty's Chapels Royal, Dame Sarah Mullally, who is also the Lord Bishop of London. After the 2-minute silence, the royal family and political leaders and representatives of the Commonwealth will leave the cenotaph, and it'll be handed over to the Royal British Legion, who lead the poppy appeal to allow the veterans to march past and pay their respects. Now, the great memorial that shares with the cenotaph Whitehall to the women of World War II, of whom our late Queen was but one, and a very significant member of the Army Territorial Service. The defence of the realm rests in the hands of a younger generation, trained daily for the protection of the United Kingdom, like so many of those veterans who reflect upon previous generations. The Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition, other Cabinet Ministers and representatives of the other parties who will lay their wreaths. Also here today, former Prime Ministers who will witness the reflection the nation makes. Upon any Prime Minister at any time sits the responsibility for leading the nation and making decisions in time of conflict. Never before have so many former Prime Ministers gathered to witness a serving Prime Minister lay his wreath after the royal family. The chiefs of the armed services, led by the Chief of the Defence Staff, First Sea Lord, Chief of the General Staff and the Chief of the Air Staff, with 3 representatives of the civilian services, and then from Nepal and Ireland and from all the Commonwealth countries, representatives who will be laying their wreaths around the cenotaph. But upon the Chief of the Defence Staff and the other chiefs, the responsibility of maintaining the United Kingdom's defence at all times and remembering the cost of war. The parade is brought to attention, which is to prepare for the arrival of His Majesty the King, who will lead out the royal family as the Commonwealth representatives take their positions around the cenotaph and make the setting complete. Representatives also from many faith groups across the United Kingdom who come to attend and represent their many religions. And so the scene is set for the arrival of His Majesty the King. Welcome to Whitehall, where the King, leading the royal family, in front of the political leaders and Commonwealth representatives, prepares to lead the nation in the annual Act of Remembrance at the Cenotaph. On behalf of the nation, His Majesty the King has laid his wreath and will salute the cenotaph. Captain Edward Anderson lays a wreath on behalf of Her Majesty the Queen Consort. The Prince of Wales receives his wreath with the feathers of the heir apparent. His Royal Highness the Earl of Wessex and Forfar, dressed in the uniform of the Royal Wessex Yeomanry, a reserve unit reminding us of so many people who serve the armed forces in the reserves. Commander Anne Sullivan presents the Princess Royal with her wreath, and for her so many visits to units of which she holds close association. She's an Admiral in the Navy, a General in the Army, and an Air Chief Marshal in the Royal Air Force. And on behalf of the Duke of Kent, whose father was killed during the Second World War in an air crash, Captain Charles Longstaff lays the last of the royal wreaths. When he returns to his position, the parade will be stood at ease. To the Funeral March, number 1 in B flat minor by Beethoven, watched by the Queen Consort. The Prime Minister will lay his wreath on behalf of His Majesty's government. The Right Honourable Sir Keir Starmer, leader of the Labour Party and leader of His Majesty's opposition. The leader of the Westminster Scottish National Party, and on behalf of the Scottish National Party Plaid Cymru Parliamentary Group, the Right Honourable Ian Blackford. The Right Honourable Sir Ed Davey, leader of the Liberal Democrats. the leader of the Democratic Unionist Party and leader of the Democratic Unionist Party in the House of Commons, the Right Honourable Sir Geoffrey Donaldson. And representing all members of the House of Commons and House of Lords, the Speaker of the House of Commons, the Right Honourable Sir Lindsay Hoyle, and the Lord Speaker, the Right Honourable the Lord McFall. And the Right Honourable James Cleverly, Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs, and the Right Honourable Suella Braverman, Secretary of State for the Home Department, on behalf of the intelligence agencies. The first group to lay their wreaths will be the Crown Dependencies and Overseas Territories, the Bailiwick of Guernsey, Bailiwick of Jersey, the Isle of Man, Anguilla, Bermuda, the British Virgin Islands, Cayman Islands, the Falkland Islands, especially in our mind this 40th anniversary of the war there, Gibraltar, Montserrat, St. Helena, Ascension and Tristan da Cunha, and Turks and Caicos Islands. Groups representing a Commonwealth that laid so much of its own blood at the battlefields, in the seas and in the skies of 2 world wars and since. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Ghana and Malaysia. Nigeria, Cyprus, Sierra Leone, Tanzania, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, Uganda, and Kenya. Although not a member of the Commonwealth and therefore not represented here, we remember that so many in Zimbabwe also laid down their lives. On the south side now of the cenotaph will be laid wreaths by Malawi, Malta, which was given a George Cross and still bears that decoration on its flag, Zambia, the Gambia, Singapore, Guyana, Botswana, Lesotho and Barbados. Mauritius, Eswatini, formerly known as Swaziland, Tonga, Fiji, Bangladesh, the Bahamas, Grenada, Papua New Guinea, Seychelles, Commonwealth of Dominica, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. All these wreaths represent the breadth of reach that the wars had, and a reminder of the danger of world war. The final group from the Commonwealth: Belize, Antigua and Barbuda, the Maldives, St. Christopher and Nevis, Brunei Darussalam, Namibia, Cameroon, Mozambique, Rwanda, Gabon and Togo. The United Kingdom's closest neighbour, not in the Commonwealth, is represented now by the Ambassador of Ireland to the United Kingdom, and also with the close link to Nepal, the Ambassador of Nepal. It is the armed forces who principally fight the battles and who are constantly ready to defend the United Kingdom on their behalf, led by the Chief of the Defence Staff. Also will lay their wreaths for the Royal Navy, the First Sea Lord and Chief of Naval Staff, for the Army, the Chief of the General Staff, and for the Royal Air Force, the Chief of the Air Staff. Wars are not only fought by those in the armed forces. To remember the civilian services, the merchant navy and fishing fleets are represented, also the Air Transport Auxiliary Association, and for other civilian services this year, the National Police Chiefs Council Chair. And we now prepare for the service of remembrance, which will be led by the Dean of the Chapels Royal to the King, the Lord Bishop of London.
O Almighty God, grant, we beseech thee, that we who here do honour to the memory of those who have died in the service of their country and of the Crown, may be so inspired by the spirit of their love and fortitude that, forgetting all selfish and unworthy motives, we may live only to thy glory and to the service of mankind. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Teach us, good Lord, to serve thee as thou deservest, to give and not to count the cost, to fight and not to heed the wounds, to toil and not to seek for rest, to labor and not to ask for any reward, save that of knowing that we do thy will. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Unto God's gracious mercy and protection we commit you. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up the light of his countenance upon you and give you his peace, this day and always. Amen.
The rouse will be sounded, followed by the national anthem and God Save the King. With the salute, the King will take leave of the cenotaph, having stood exactly where King George V did in 1919, Edward VIII, George VI, and his mother, Queen Elizabeth II. He leads the royal family back into the Foreign and Commonwealth building, the national act of remembrance having now been led. Members of the royal household following. Led by the Sergeant of the Vestry, the Dean, Sub-Dean, and Chaplain General. And then the cross bearer with this cross that was made especially to be presented to the Queen in her Platinum Jubilee year. The 4 plant badges of the United Kingdom in the 4 arms of the cross. The children and gentlemen of the Chapels Royal, created to go with medieval kings as they went with their armies to France. The Chapels Royal played and sang at Agincourt in 1415 as the Prime Minister and political leaders upon whom the responsibility of how to respond to war in Europe at this time in the coming weeks and months. Former Prime Ministers who carried that burden. And members of the Cabinet. The Union flag, the white ensign and the blue ensign with the sound of the seagulls. All that can be heard here in Whitehall. The off-white Portland stone of the cenotaph now marked by the blood-red poppies of so many memories. When you go home, tell them of us and say, for your tomorrow, we gave our today. Admiral Sir Tony Radakin, who spoke earlier to us on Sky News about the challenges faced by the armed forces, always being ready to both defend the nation and also to train the Ukrainians at the moment for the challenge they face and the representatives of the civilian services. The Ukrainian flag flying high above Whitehall as the clouds of war are not so far away from London. And in the balconies where members of the royal family watched this ceremony, they've now withdrawn. The Earl of Wessex and Forfar will represent the King later in Horse Guards Parade and take the salute of all those who are gathered as veterans today as the Major General commanding the Household Division, General Chris Geeker, has just left the parade and they stand at ease. And the tempo will slightly change as the young service people get the chance to relax in the stand easy position, lest we forget the freedoms they died for. The parade will now reconfigure in order for the veterans to have their moment. They got to London, some of them over the last few days, and they have been forming up in their regimental units and organisations as the representatives of the Royal British Legion move forward in order to lay their wreaths. Amongst them, representing Transport for London, Mr. Gary Best. Representing Legion Scotland, Lieutenant Commander Martin Hawthorne. The Royal Commonwealth Ex-Services League, Colonel Michael Warrenick. The Royal Air Force Association, Air Vice Marshal Nigel Barristow. And the Army Benevolent Fund, Soldiers Charity by General Sir James Everard, and the Royal Naval Association by Mr. Stanley Keith Ridley. The first wreath was laid by the National President, who recovers his bowler hat. He is Lieutenant General James Bashall. Naval Association. And it's been incredible to see the volunteers that have stepped forward to support the Royal British Legion generally to different parts of the United Kingdom this year. And also Poppy Scotland, in Scotland, also everywhere, the chance to make contributions towards the National Poppy Appeal. All charities are having to find better ways to draw cash when few people carry it, and increasingly the tap screen opportunities will be used. General Sir James Everard on behalf of the Army Benevolent Fund. Meanwhile, the bands of the Household Division will be dividing and moving to position to bring the different columns of those who will be marching past shortly. The final part of the music medley, agreed by the King, being played, and we'll just enjoy as they play. While the wreaths of the Royal British Legion are being laid individually, we can prepare for very nearly 10,000 people from around 300 different armed forces and civilian associations who will march past the cenotaph. But of course, throughout the United Kingdom, other events have been taking place, and we see that on behalf of Scotland, Legion Scotland's Lieutenant Commander Martin Hawthorne lays his wreath with the St Andrew's Cross picked out in white and blue. particularly for Transport for London, who do so much to help people get to this national event. Mr. Stanley Keith Ridley lays his wreath on behalf of bus drivers and underground personnel who have, particularly during the Second World War and the First, endured so much. Many of the London bus drivers who were reservists took their buses to France to help move the troops around in the early parts of the First World War. Led by Sir James Bashall, they will now move through the Foreign and Commonwealth building and join the Earl of Wessex and Forfar for the march past to arrive and give their salute in Horse Guards. And the band will come to a conclusion at the end of this tune, hand over to the pipes and drums of the 4th Battalion, the Royal Regiment of Scotland, and organise the march past. The bands of the Grenadier Guards and the Coldstream Guards marching forwards first. And coming out from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office building, I think one of the most moving of the wreaths, brought by the Widows Association, a simple white cross of chrysanthemums, which will be placed on the south side of the cenotaph to remember that the families left behind and the challenges for their families. We remember them as the pipes play the Pibroch of Donald Dhu. As the pipes transport us to the northern part of the United Kingdom, to Scotland, from where so many went to battle, this scene is now set for the second part of the remembrance ceremonies here. Laura Bundock joins me. She watched the moment when the King and the royal family laid their wreaths and led the nation. A very moving day for the King.
It certainly was, and I think you could see how the King felt moved. This is an important moment, isn't it? It is another significant milestone as we transition to a new monarch, and perhaps certainly here for me today it felt like another one of those moments where we stop, we pause, and we realise that things are different, that things have now changed. And of course a huge moment for the King, his first moment as sovereign, laying the wreath on behalf of the nation. Now, he of course knows this routine. He laid his first wreath here back 50 years ago, and it was in 2017 when the Queen symbolically perhaps passed that duty to her son, and we've seen him leading the mourning here at the cenotaph, but a very different moment for him as sovereign, now responsible for that. And I think particularly perhaps during the national anthem, you got a sense and you could see that it wasn't lost on him, the enormity of this moment, but a very solemn ceremony here as expected. And now, of course, the march begins and there is a clap from the crowds. It's a warm respect, is how I probably describe the atmosphere here, as the march of some 10,000 service men and women will now begin.
And the first column to pass by is the Army column, led by the 16th 5th Royal, Queen's Royal Lancers, the 17th 21st Lancers, the Royal Lancers, and I see all the way along the side of them the barking instructions of the Garrison Sergeant Major Mr. Stokes. And as they pass, if they have their wreaths, you'll see they're taken by wreath collectors. And they're supported here by some King Scouts. King Scouts do so much for this event. They're volunteers at the top of their scouting time, and they hand out the Order of Service. They form the Guard of Honour either side of the door for the royal family when they come here, and they help the wreath layers with the distribution of all this respect and affection for the memory of past comrades. Each of these regimental organisations will have come together and will doubtless, after they've given their salute to the Earl of Wessex and Forfar in Horse Guards, where they started their day, they'll all disperse to different places around London. The welcome is always enormous for them. You're seeing the wonderful cherry trousers there of the King's Royal Hussars. And it is indeed a long way to Tipperary, but these wonderful veterans will go whatever distance it is to remember the past, to come together as friends again, and to go and party later on. watched by the serving soldiers, sailors, airmen and women of today. These veterans, some of them injured, perhaps in battle, often many of them injured in ways we can't see, their mental health affected by battle or whatever event they attended, be it even addressing the challenges of terrorism within the United Kingdom. But whatever it is, they're here with their memories, and the crowd on the side, along with the young servicemen and women, wish them extremely well under these autumnal leaves. Laura, it was the first time that the Queen Consort laid a wreath, and it's also very special to see that the Duke of Kent's wreath is still being laid. Difficult for him now to do it himself.
That's right. I think the wreaths themselves tell us a lot. Very symbolic, obviously. The King now has a new wreath. It's a different design, but very much paying tribute to the Queen, reflecting back on her wreaths over the years. And his wreath, as we saw there, large poppies set above black leaves with the ribbons of his racing colours, the racing colours of the Queen for so many years on the wreaths she laid here at the Cenotaph. And then, of course, the Queen Consort Camilla with her wreath now, bearing her new cipher, with the racing colours of her grandfather laid by an equerry on her behalf. And we saw, of course, Prince William, the Prince of Wales, now stepping into his father's shoes as Prince of Wales, laying his wreath on behalf of himself and the Princess of Wales too. So the wreaths themselves say an awful lot, and I think speak to the continuity here as well, this sense of tradition, but of things marching and moving on as well. And this transition, I think, of power that we've seen, not just from the sovereign, but looking at the prime ministers who are gathered there today as well. But the wreaths very much on display now as the marching continues. And a lovely clap here at the Cenotaph as they pass by from those who've gathered in the crowd. Some 10, 15 people deep, these crowds. They've waited a long time, and clapping as the veterans, the serving men and women walk past the Cenotaph here.
Each veteran turning their head in salute to the glorious dead, represented by the Cenotaph. The First World War song, "Oh, oh, oh, what a lovely war," as the Royal Military Police with their famous red berets pass by. And coming to give their salute, the Chelsea pensioners, inn pensioners as they're known. They go to live at the Royal Hospital Chelsea that was built by King Charles II on the banks of the Thames in Chelsea. And there, these men and women hand over their pension books and therefore are looked after within the system as inn pensioners, and they are being organised by their own regimental sergeant major. And so many of these songs were sung by soldiers in the First World War, marching to or back from the trenches. And it's the applause that means so much to these veterans who served. The former Women's Royal Army Corps passing by there. Now the armed forces have women in every regiment and corps, and signs of a changing army, changing armed forces as we look to the future. The preparations of drill for those who are less able, also taken extremely seriously. And they will have been so well looked after by everyone who's organised this parade, as they, along with one of their number, carrying the wreath on behalf of the Chelsea pensioners, prepare to hand it over to the wreath gatherers. By the time this parade has passed by, just short of 10,000 veterans will have given their salute in reflection of their own memories. Their families will be proudly watching them do it and encouraging them on as they march through their lives, carrying the memories of conflicts, sometimes the scars too, and always helped by other veterans around them to deal with the challenges that warfare have created and to always feel part of something. The United Kingdom, with its military covenants, which have been signed up to by towns and cities and organisations in government to make sure that those who have served are always looked after. But this is their day, Remembrance Sunday, the chance for them, as this has happened at towns, villages, cities all over the United Kingdom. That unity that is shared and that brings both sadness but joy, most definitely too. I'm wearing the Royal Air Force tartan from the Women's Royal Air Force. They will lay their wreath too. As we heard the strains of There'll Always Be an England. We said at the beginning of this act of remembrance how, especially this year, we mark the 40th anniversary of the Falklands War, when the task force of Navy, Army and Air Force were gathered in very short time to travel 8,000 miles to recover islands just beyond the shores of South America and ensure that British subjects there could continue to choose their form of government and future. For those veterans, and a special mark has come this year from all those who are gathered as the Royal Air Force start to pass by, and we see the tarmac here gradually become redder and redder. But we have seen His Majesty the King lead the nation here at the Cenotaph for the first time in his reign, carrying on a tradition that was so carefully followed by his late mother, Queen Elizabeth II. We have watched the royal family gather with political leaders and Commonwealth representatives. But most of all, we've had you, with your memory of what it means to reflect upon war and to desire that it never happen again. As Europe is challenged by war again, let us remember the dead and let us make sure that we reflect Remembrance with honour this year.